Michael Mcdonald, welcome to the Pave the Way show, man. I'm excited for this interview. We just connected like 2 weeks ago at Investor Fuel in Vegas, and we sat next to each other at dinner a couple nights. We connected about a lot of stuff. We're both relatively young guys, and I was really impressed with what you and your business partner have built in Omaha, Nebraska. So I'm looking forward to number one, finding out how you got into the business and what your backstory is like, and then getting into what you're doing today with your company in Omaha, because you guys are doing some big things. So I'm excited to get to unpack the journey.
Absolutely, man. It was a good time in Vegas. Good to meet you out here. And yeah, it's only been a few years since we started the business, and it's been quite the adventure and a little bit of a roller coaster since we started, but it's been a blessing and exciting, and I'm excited to share with your audience a little bit more about it. So looking forward to it.
Awesome, brother. So let's just get right into it. So, now you're a full-time real estate investor, but you probably weren't doing this since you were, in middle school and high school. So what did you do, I guess, after high school? Like, what's your background look like? And then eventually, how did you get into the real estate business over the last few years?
Yeah, man. So I took the traditional path of, hey, go to school, get a job, and you're going to live the American dream, right? Get your house, do all this stuff. Well, when I went to college, I just had the expectation that I needed to go. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I actually started off in college as an electronics technology major. I had no clue why, because I don't have that much interest in electronics, to be frank. But what ended up happening is I decided to take some generals. I spent 4 years at a community college. I took two years of general requirements after changing my major, and then I got my nutrition degree. And so from there, I got a corporate job at a hospital working as a dietetics technician, and I was making bank, man. I was making like, I think $35,000 a year. So at that point in time, my wife was like, "Hey, let's talk about maybe, we just got married after I got that job, and talking about getting a house." And I will never forget the day. Working paycheck to paycheck that we closed on that house. I think we had literally 3 cents in our bank account. I'm not exaggerating. That's the first time in my life where I realized that this is not the path that I want to take, and this is not how I want to bring a family up and about into this life. And so, first time in my life where I started looking around, kind of figuring out how to sell some stuff and try to figure out how we could make sure we can make this first down payment on this home that we just purchased. And that was kind of the start to learning about real estate and then getting into it from there.
That's awesome, dude. So this is back in Nebraska, I'm guessing, correct?
That's right. Yes, that's right. For the audiences, I have since relocated to Las Vegas.
Okay, so you started in Omaha, Nebraska. You're born and raised there, I'm guessing, right? Is that
actually born and raised in a small town? Actually, just for references, and I'm not saying this to like say, hey, this guy's literally, grew up in a mud hut or anything like that. But I grew up in a trailer park in a town of 300 people, and so
300 people in one town.
Yeah, it's actually a village. So. So a legitimate village is what it was considered. And then I went to college in Lincoln, Nebraska. And then that's where my wife and I had purchased that home that I referenced. So yeah, we got the journey started there. And then shortly after, I learned about real estate wholesaling, to be specific.
So you started out small town Nebraska, town or village of 300 people. Moved to Lincoln, which is a bigger city, but not the size of Omaha. It's about like an hour. I've been to both cities last year. Nice area. I really like it out there in the Midwest. It's nice in the spring and summer. In the winter, it probably sucks, but yeah, because of the weather. So you get into real estate. What's your first 6 months in the real estate business look like? And then what year are we talking here, timeline wise?
Yeah. So before I get into that, I want to kind of talk a little bit about how I got into it as a reference. And then I'll talk timeline wise. It was January of 2018. One of my buddies hit me up and said, "Hey man, check this out. This company's coming through town. They're going to do this real estate seminar. It's free. Come with me and let's check it out." And I said, "Cool. I have nothing to lose." I was always entrepreneur minded, even though my family's not business. I don't have a background in real estate, none of that. Yeah. I was like, you know what? I feel like I'm meant for something more. And so I checked it out, and I'll tell you what, man, they have some really good salespeople. at those
Dude,
events.
for sure. I did the same damn thing you did, bro. It's almost like we live fucking the same life.
Right.
Yeah.
So long story short is they sold me, man. Like they're like $1,000, come check out this 3-day event. We're going to teach you how to make money in real estate without little to no money down. I'm like, cool. So did it, put the money on a credit card, split it with my buddy.
Same here, bro. Like, what the fuck? This is the same exact story. Like, I literally did the same damn thing, bro. That is insane.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I feel like we're not the only ones either. I feel
Yeah,
like this is probably a pretty common story.
Yeah, right.
Which is why it's important, because this is how people get started. I get there and I'm like, this is mind blowing. These guys are like, yeah, I make $30,000 to $40,000 without even doing anything to a property. I'm like, this sounds too good to be true. And I listened, I paid attention, and I'm like, no, this is legit. And they're like, okay, $25,000, and we're gonna show you everything that you need to know. As if, you know, they basically just tease the full 3 days. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay. My buddy at the time was like, hey man, we should do this. I'm like, how? Like, I'm already 1,000 on my credit card in debt that I don't have. What do you mean, how are we gonna do this? And he's like, well, they're talking about how you can, you know, raise the money on credit to do this. I'm like,
what's your credit limit?
I'm like, oh, okay. So at this time, this was in Omaha. I called my wife and I was like, hey, this is going to sound crazy, but like, here's what they're proposing. They're actually able to help me get credit, 0 interest for 15 months. What do you think? She's like, if you think you can do it and you want to do it, then go for it. And I'm an all in type of person. So I'm like, screw it, let's do it. Put the money on the credit cards, get home from the event. And she tells me, I didn't want to tell you this while you're there because I wanted you to focus, but I have something to show you. Long story short, found out we were expecting, and that was the best motivation that I could have ever asked for to get me started into real estate. And so that was how I got started, right? And from there, the first 6 months were a whole lot of struggle.
Oh yeah, that always is, bro. If you ain't struggling, you're doing something's wrong. If you're not struggling in the beginning.
Yep. So I dove in, and at this time I was working a job. I was working at the hospital part-time or full-time and doing this on the evenings and weekends. And it was 6 months, actually almost to a T, where I got my first contract. And I'm like, all right, let's go. And then the buyer fell through and the deal fell through. And then I'm like, oh, okay, so this is what it's going to be like. And then the next month I finally got my first deal. It was a Zillow for sale by owner. We assigned that bad boy and we made $20,000. And I looked at my wife and said, this is legit. Let's pay off these credit cards and let's get ourselves out of some debt and make this thing happen.
Dude, that is epic. So it's the big takeaway I want to have the listeners here, if they're new or if they're experienced, they can relive their probably their previous life in real estate, is like, at the end of the day, if you're not struggling in the beginning, you're doing something wrong. I actually was grateful, and I'm grateful for you, and I'm grateful for me that we struggled in the beginning, because we earned the success. Like, let's say we both started and we went out and we made $100,000 our first quarter. We would have been so jaded and we would have had such a bent view of reality when the inevitable setbacks happen. Because I mean, setbacks happen every day in our business, right? Like literally every day.
Yeah.
If the path was easy in the beginning, it really would ultimately make the rest of the game a lot harder. So when you were struggling, here's a big question I have for you, because a lot of new people can definitely relate to this. What was the conversation going on in your head when you were struggling for 6 months working for free without seeing any results? Like, how did you converse with yourself? Because it's a lot. People like have a tough time keeping going in that scenario.
You know, honestly, the best thing that I could have learned at this education was the conscious mind versus the subconscious mind, and how important self-development was throughout that journey. Because they teach you, if you don't have your mindset right, you're not going to basically be successful in anything in life. And that was the biggest catalyst to my success, because when I had the $50,000 racked up on credit cards, and I didn't even mention that they called me back and sold me on a one-on-one after that. So I put $50,000 on credit cards. So I think that's good to know as well, because here I am, like trying to make the minimum interest payment of $500-$600 a month, which is way more than I should have been making, and we were living on a shoestring budget. It would have been very easy to think there's not enough, and I'm never going to pay this back, and all these terrible beliefs that would have just led us to bankruptcy, right? But at the end of the day, I knew that there was something bigger and better. So my mind was focused on the amount that I was going to make and how this was going to work and how that was going to feel. I was envisioning my life, what it was going to be like when I was cashing $20,000 checks on a regular basis. And I just kept my head up, and days were hard, man, but I had faith and I just kept pushing forward and wasn't looking at the negative of the failure and all that. I was looking at the positive and what it's going to become.
I love that, man. It's so true. And like, that is what separates the successful people from the people who give up and fail and don't think it works and think the seminars are a scam, which, listen, I mean, you are a product of that success, right? So it's like a lot of people like to shit on education, but it's like, honestly, when you pay attention. Like I mean, at least for me, man, if someone told me how to make $10 million for free, I'd probably take it and be like, I'll start that next week. But if I paid someone $30,000 to learn how to make $10 million, you best bet I'd be paying attention because I got some skin in the game, you know?
Oh, dude, how true is it though? It's 100% true. It's called skin in the game.
Skin in the game. When you take down a prop, like when I borrow money from investors, generally I put some of my own cash into that deal because it makes me serious about it. I have some legit cash in that thing. So it's just a principle. And I'm really happy that you were able to persist and obviously see the potential this business can obviously deliver. And you guys are doing amazing stuff now in Omaha, which is a great area. I've been there, been to Lincoln. I know some of your friends in Omaha. So you guys seem like you have a great community there in the real estate arena. So let's just fast forward. It's 2022 right now. We're still in the beginning of the year. What does your business look like today from a high level perspective?
Sure. So it's progressed quite a bit over the last year. We've added team members. So obviously, it's myself and my business owner at the top, and then we have acquisition manager, which you met, Justin.
Great guy. Awesome.
Yeah,
guy.
good dude for sure. Justin, and then we just hired a lead manager who's going to be assisting in more of a junior acquisitions position. I've always had 3 or 4 virtual assistants in the Philippines doing like data stuff and cold calling and texting in the background. And then, of course, now that we're doing more volume, I brought on a disposition manager. And really what they're doing is they're getting rid of inventory. They're selling off properties on a wholesale basis. The ones that we don't, of course, keep and flip, because we do keep and flip a good amount still too. And then other than that, man, is that's it. That's all we have. Well, take that back. We just hired an office manager. So we do have an in-house office manager, and we just opened up a shop in Lincoln for a brokerage. And so things are growing, and it's an exciting journey.
That's awesome. So you got a full-fledged team. You're doing real business. You're wholesaling. You're flipping. You guys got rental properties. So you have a real functioning business. Now, my question for you is, when did you move? Like, tell me about how you got to Las Vegas, because I do something very similar to you. I mean, I do business locally here in San Diego, but most of our stuff that we do is back on the East Coast. So I'm pretty familiar with how to run kind of like the remote business, which has its pros and cons. So like, what made you move to Vegas out of all places? I really love Vegas, but a lot of people usually go to California or Florida.
Yeah.
And then like, how have you adapted to be able to like manage your business from afar, but still make sure that, everything is getting done?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it was a really tough decision. It was literally months. I'm talking 3 months after I got into business with my current business partner. Like about a year into wholesaling is we partnered up, and my wife and I, this was about the time where we started thinking about selling our house. And
Lincoln,
how can I do what needs to happen in this business and take it to the next level? Because she could tell I was like coming home after work, calling till 9 o'clock at night. My eyes were bloodshot. And she looked at me one day. She's like, "You can't keep doing this. You're going to burn yourself out. And, you look like you're 50 and you're 24. And I'm like, "You're right." So that was the catalyst right there, is let's sell the house. That'll give us enough money to quit my job full time. And then from there, she's like, "Well, if we're going to sell our house, like nothing's tying us down. We have a 1-year-old, like she's not in school. My sister lives in Vegas. Why don't we just move to Vegas?" I'm like, "Hold on a second. You're telling me you want me not only to sell our house that we thought was the American dream, you want me to have a conversation with my business partner, and you want me to quit my job and move to Vegas? Hold on a second. Like, this was overwhelming at the time.
Yeah.
And we started thinking about it, man. And we're like, you know what? Why not? I'm going to talk to my business partner. I'm just going to get his thoughts. And he's like, you know what? I don't want to see you leave, but go for it. I wish I would have done that when I was younger. And so I'm like, all right, here we go. So the day I sold my house, I quit my job. We moved into an apartment for a couple of months until we could find something in Vegas. And we moved in a couple blocks away from her sister. And that's how we ended up here.
Dude, that's awesome. And how you liking Las Vegas life? I've spent time there on vacation. I've never like hung out there for more than a week. But it seems like I've been all over the place. It's a really nice area from what I've seen. I like how it's suburban and, you got good weather and the low taxes. So how have you adjusted to the Las Vegas life? And what's it like living there versus like going there to like gamble, because I hated the place.
Dude, it was like, well, coming from Nebraska and you've been through there and, obviously the city's the city, but outside of that, there's not a whole lot to do and see.
Yeah.
And the winters are brutal. So that was like one of the biggest things is like, we don't want to deal with these winters forever.
Yeah.
And we don't want our kids to like grow up living in, just, inside all day long. So the weather's amazing, obviously. There's so much to do and see. So we live in a neighborhood that's like very family friendly. There's parks, there's pools and stuff like that. So absolutely love that. And then of course the 3-hour drive to California doesn't suck. And then,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's not that far to California. You go to San Diego and LA and you're right there.
Yep. Doing our first family vacay to Disneyland this week, next weekend. So yeah, dude, we're loving life out here. It's amazing. We've been blessed. For sure.
That's awesome. So do you get up like super early because of your 2 hours back, you're in Pacific time and your business is operating on Central time. So it's a little crazy.
So your 9 o'clock normally starts at 6 o'clock here, right?
Yeah.
It's been a bit of a juggling act to try to figure that out. Is like my team has a meeting at 7 every day, and I'm over here like trying to get out of bed at 4:30 just so I can like not have like crusties in my eyes when I'm showing up to my team meeting.
Yeah, right. Because it's super weird. It's that is the one thing I don't like about being on the West Coast. Is I like being able to be on the same time zone just because I feel like I'm in more control of my day. Like I've been able to make it work for years, but like, dude, if I get up at 5:30, it's 8:30 back east, like East Coast. So like the good thing is at like 4 o'clock local time, California, like I'm good, but like the whole day feels like kind of an uphill battle. So I do like going back every couple months and being able to like get up at 6 o'clock Eastern. But then when I'm doing stuff in California, I got to stay up till like 8 o'clock at night. Cause like escrow is emailing me, so it's a little trade-off for a big benefit in my opinion. So let's jump into some of the stuff. So the Omaha market. So, a lot of people, for example, I'll give you this. I've had a lot of people ask me this. They're living in Florida or in New York or California where it's like really expensive and people are scared. Everyone has this grand pie in the sky picture that like the Midwest is less competitive. And I've done mailings in Oklahoma and stuff, and we've tied deals up. I have found that even though the Midwest might be cheaper, there's still a good amount of people doing the same thing. So you like the point of that is the grass is never always greener. And I found any market that has a lot of opportunity to make money in, there's going to be competition that you could eventually develop relationships with to do deals together. But I think this whole notion of like, I'm living in Anaheim, California. I'm going to just start investing in, Kearney, Nebraska. Like you're still going to run into problems. And I just don't feel like people make the right decision to go virtual because of the lack of competition. Like, does that make sense? Cause like I've just seen that before and it's kind of BS.
Yeah. I agree. It's so true. The grass is not always greener on the other side. No. If you're in Vegas, like I can speak from this because I've done business in Vegas and I've done business in the Midwest. The only thing that you might avoid is the hedge funds. You're still going to have a whole bunch of other ambitious investors who are out there on the ground spending money on marketing and trying to get that deal. So you still have to take that into account. It's just, what are you going to do to stand out and be better at the end of the day? And no matter what, you can do this anywhere in the country. And price points and stuff are different, but that competition wise isn't a whole lot different.
It's the same thing. So on the exit strategy side, now you have a few ways you're making money on these deals. What do you guys like? When you guys get an accepted offer or a signed contract, like what is your process to decide if you're going to wholesale it, flip it, or keep it as a rental?
Yeah, I mean, right now is like we're looking at the age of the property because that's one big difference in the Midwest versus even in Vegas is like we come across 1800, like 1885, 1900 houses.
Yeah, same.
They're
Sucks.
they're they're train wrecks, man. So those properties we want nothing to do with. We don't want to purchase them because we don't want to get stuck with them. And we actually just bought one, so I don't know why, but we're having a hard time selling it because we tried to just buy it, clean it up, and wholesale it, and nobody's biting on it. And so that's one of the big factors is age, and then the amount of work. Like we don't want to take on properties that are 50 to $100,000 rehabs. We just don't want to do it. So if we can just buy a property that's a little bit newer, we know the resale is going to be very easy. And we also know that if it's a certain style of property, like a ranch or like a split, those are good for our rental portfolio because there's typically a little less headaches with those types of properties in our area just because of the age and they're newer. So those are a few things that we take into account. And then of course, how good of a discount did we get? Do we want to cherry pick it?
Of course.
And we're going to be able to pull our cash out of it,
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I have found that rental properties, I need to buy cheaper than flips in order to keep them as rentals. It's funny. People don't like it. If you really like get into the weeds of the burr and you know what you're doing, like you need to buy the rental cheaper than the flip because of all of these ancillary costs that come up with like closing costs on the refi. The tenant's probably going to have to get evicted. And I normally can pay way, 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 way more if I'm doing a quick flip versus a rental. Like I have a condo I'm buying and I'm like, I wanted to keep it as a rental, but I would have had to leave 30 grand in the deal, but I can flip it and make 15 or 20. So it's like,
yeah,
I found the rental properties, you got to like, at least in my area, you have to steal them to make them work as a burr. You got to buy them about 100 G's below market value.
What would that be? What would that be perspective in terms of like, because some people go off of like, hey, the 80% of ARV or whatever. Like, what put some perspective on that? Because $100,000 is like a free house.
Oh yeah. Well, my market's expensive, so I'll give you an example. So I bought a property for 125 grand. I'm refinancing it tomorrow. It got appraised for like I think either 215 or 220. So I bought it right at about 100K below what it's currently worth because there's tenants in there.
Okay.
And like and 125 was like the most I could pay. Like anything more than that, it wouldn't have made sense. I'm still going to have about 5,000 of my own money in that deal after I refi. So I'm not even going to have like an infinite return. I'm going to have $5,000 of my capital stuck in that deal. And that was basically about 100 grand below market. I bought another one I stole for 65 grand and it's worth like 190. That one I put money in my pocket, but that's maybe every couple of years you'll get a deal like that.
Yeah.
And then I have another one. Well, actually one of them I'm just paying cash for because it's a condo. It's really cheap. But another one, it's worth like 215, 220. I'm buying it for 125. So like in order for me to keep them as a rental, I need to make sure that because I'm going to always refi at 70 cents on the dollar. 70% of the value is what I'm going to get the loan at. I want to have at least 30% equity.
That makes sense.
I need to buy it at that number. And then I got to account for the closing costs on the purchase, the closing costs on the refi, all the holding costs, all the eviction costs, because there's probably a bad tenant in there. Mm-hmm. And then just the timeline and the repairs. It's like, I need to get these rentals extremely cheap when like sometimes when we're doing flips, like, dude, I'll buy a flip where there's like a $40,000 like gross profit, like between buy price and the sell price, but I know I can still squeak away 15 grand and I can pay more than my competitor just because like I know the market.
Right.
So the rental, like the point of that for the listeners is like, if you're going to start buying rental properties, you really need to know what you're doing because that's a completely separate business than flipping and even wholesaling. I mean, the rental business, I ran into a lot of trouble with. I'm getting better at it now. We were talking about this offline, but if you're going to be doing the burr, you really need to have your stuff dialed in. You got to have lenders who will refi you or else you're screwed. The biggest thing I would say is you've got to know the laws in your state when it comes to dealing with tenants, because generally, at least from my experience, you're going to get a good deal because you're going to buy a bad tenant or you're going to buy a bad property. So you got to pick one. And then you got to be able to fix the tenant, AKA kick them out, or fix the property, which, requires construction knowledge. So I think the BRRRR is more, from my experience, it's more of an advanced strategy. If you're brand spanking new, I think you can do the BRRRR, but I think you should always start with wholesale deals, maybe doing a couple rehabs, and then eventually get into the BRRRR, because there's a lot more moving parts on the BRRRR that can be a little overwhelming if you're brand spanking new, you've never bought a house before. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a natural progression, just like you said. We start here and then we progress to flips, then we progress to rentals.
Yeah.
Once you have all those figured out, you can piece it all together and it makes more sense.
Yes.
You started off the opposite. People do, and that's great if it works for you. A lot of problem for a lot of newbies is capital. So go figure out how to make a good amount of capital that way you can deploy it in there. I'm curious though, is the 70% just a preference, or is that just like what your lender's loan to value is on your refinances? Because I've kind of heard the opposite of people saying they're able to pay more for rentals, and I'm sure you've heard the same too.
Yeah. That
they're able to pay more because they can push the values higher, and that's leveraging. So are you just being careful about that?
I'm careful. I'm weird with debt. Like, I don't really like owing money to people. Like, I do it for real estate just because, like, you have to if you want to grow. But I really only feel comfortable having about 70% loan to value on my stuff, just because if the market crashes or if the tenant doesn't pay, because like in New York, it's such a landlord friendly state or tenant friendly state that you're going to probably have tenants not pay you, and you can't do shit for 6 months. You're going to have to be writing the check, right? To the HOA. So like, I'm always in like panic mode, and I'm like, okay, well, if this is inevitably going to happen with enough properties. So like, I got to make sure that like my monthly payment is not something that is unmanageable in the event that the tenant doesn't pay. And then I also want to make sure I have that equity there, because in case the thing goes to hell in a handbasket, I could at least sell it and make a good profit.
Makes sense.
And that's in New York. If this was like in Texas or Georgia, where you could knock on the door and the tenant leaves, like, I would be a little bit more aggressive, but it's really, really difficult to get tenants out in my area. So you got to really be sure about your numbers. And they're passing a lot of laws now that's like this thing called good cause eviction, which is like, if you can only get a tenant out of a property if they're either not if you have good cause, which is like they're not paying, you're selling. But like, if a tenant's just like paying like low rent, legally in some cities in my area, you can't kick the tenant out. They have to stay by law. So it's like turning into like kind of like communism. And I'm probably going to eventually stop buying there or sell all my shit and go somewhere else, because that's like, can't run a business that way. But it just taught me to be really conservative with my numbers. So that's this, I think. And the point of that is like, every market's different, right? Like in New York, that's usually how it works in the tri-state area. But I have friends who do stuff in like Greenville, South Carolina, and they're buying houses for 30 grand, putting 30 grand into them, getting them appraised for 100, getting all their money out. And, they're making a couple $100 a month, and that works too. So you got to know your area. I like how you started in Nebraska and then you moved away to Las Vegas. Once you had your Nebraska stuff dialed in, you sold your house, you had a real business. Like, you didn't just kind of like start random, you know what I mean? Like, you already had a solid system set up, and then you moved and you already kind of knew how to manage the business. You know what I mean?
I would say it was a little premature though. I didn't really talk too much to at what point we got really ramped up. It was really just me and Ryan when we moved out here. But to your point, it forced us to treat it like a business. It forced us to bring on personnel and people and process, because then, I can't just go run and see a house. Like, I gotta have somebody in place who can go close that deal for me. And don't get me wrong, I close plenty of deals over the phone, even to this day.
I love it. Me too.
It forces you to create a process.
I love it. It's so true. And like, it will force you to systematize stuff. Like, I still to this day, like, even if I'm in San Diego or in New York, I will go to a house if it just absolutely is like, it makes sense. Like, you know what? But most of the time I'm like, even though I'm local, how do I have someone else go? Because it's like the way of thinking. Like, we have a house we bought with all this drama. There's like pot in the house and it smells and there's like chaos there. And it's like, yeah, I could go there tomorrow when I land. But like, is me driving 45 minutes there, 45 minutes back, and farting around at the house for 45 minutes a really good use of my time? Yeah. Doesn't matter if I'm local or not. That's just a poor use of time. You know 100%. What I mean?
Dude, I've done that. I've done that out here before. And I'm like walking around this stinky house and like just wasting time. And like, I'm like, what am I doing here? I'm never doing that again. So honestly, I've gone on two 2 appointments in the 2.5 years I've lived here.
Yeah.
I won't do it again. Just
It's so true, bro.
yeah.
It's just like the best use of an owner's time. And that we're not like saying we're on a pedestal, but this is just the reality of it. The best use of a time, we make mistakes and all this, but if the best use of a time is making sure the business is running well and helping your team and helping them with anything they need, and then making sure your operations are dialed in and fixing problems. But like for you to go there and I'm not saying you directly, but like to go run around all day, it's you're training yourself to be way too involved. And I'd rather pay somebody to go there and do it because that's what they like to do. That's what they do best. And they're going to do it way better than me versus me say, oh, you know what? I can just run out to the house right now. It's like, no. Like I actually had this happen last week. I went on an appointment because it was a smoking smoke. We actually got the lead in Vegas and Brett lives in New York. He doesn't live in San Diego. So I'm like,
nice.
I'll go. So I go out here and the house is just a disaster. And I forgot to shut the door and the guy was handicapped. So he called me all pissed off. And I was like, oh man, and I looked at the traffic pattern. I'm like, oh my God, for me to drive back here, it would take like 30 minutes there. I'd have to be there for 10 minutes. I'm like, you know what? I went on Craigslist locally. Like this is like local. And I'm like, hi, I need someone to close this door at this house. I'll pay you $25. You got to literally drive there, shut the door, tell the seller the door's shut because he's a little loopy. And like I paid someone local because I'm like, for me to drive there and drive back, it's like an hour and a half, like with traffic. I'm like, and it's like demoralizing. That would just take the energy out of me.
Yeah.
So you got to find ways to have other people do the things that you don't want to do. And the best use of any business owner's time is to be a leader and to make sure that they're helping their team in any way they can, whether it's with leads. Like I still help my acquisitions person with some of the sellers. Like I'm not too cool for school. Yep. We're in the trenches. If he's busy and we have a phone call, dude, I'm taking the call. Like I'm going to lead from the front because that's what it takes to win. And they see that and they feed off that energy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, do whatever it takes, right? But at the same time, respect your time enough too, as well, to know when to put an ad on Craigslist and have them go close the door.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to go. There was like human shit all over the floor. I really didn't have any interest in going back in there.
And yeah, when I said I'm walking through stinky houses, I don't mean that in a rude way, but a lot of these houses do have problems, right? And so hopefully you got that deal. Hopefully you got that contract.
We have a buyer lined up. It's a good spread, but the seller is like mentally not stable. So like we got to have his sister come into town to like sign it. But like so far we have a verbal with the seller and a verbal with the buyer. So we're just going to I sent the guy a burrito yesterday. I'm trying to win him over because San Diego's so competitive. So I Grubhub the guy a burrito. He's like, oh, thanks for that burrito. I'm like, you're welcome. Just when you sign the contract.
That right on the dotted line, right?
Yeah, burrito fee, So anyway, what the point of that, like, here's for the listeners, like Mike has a great journey. He started very similar to me, like went to the seminar and put it all on a credit card. And like, that's what it takes. But he has been able to, from my perspective, grow smart, right? He didn't just hire a team on day one. He learned the business. He understood how to do deals. He understood marketing. He eventually hired a team and now they're doing big things in Omaha, Nebraska, and they have a great business. But it didn't happen overnight, right? He took one step in front of the other day after day with consistency. And now, you can see the rewards of that previous effort, 2-3 years pay off, right?
Yeah. And we're always still improving and trying to get to the next level. There's so many levels. And that's what's great about hanging out with guys like you, Greg, and then people at our mastermind is like, okay, what we think is a lot of business might just be scratching the surface, and you're talking to another guy who's doing 400 deals a year. It's like 100 deals a year is cool, but what's the next level? And that's what's surrounding yourself by other, successful people can do for you.
It's huge. Yeah. And joining masterminds and joining courses and coaches. And I've always been a big fan of that because that's how you level up. And you're just going to by de facto almost raise to the level of those people. And it's almost like people think that's like a magical thing, but it's like, if you're hanging out with someone who has beliefs and skills and character traits, like Alex Hormozi would say, to make, 500 grand, $1 million, whatever it is, like in business income, like just by being around them, you're going to start to like adapt to how they think, act, and behave. And then you'll naturally get there eventually because you're just hanging out with someone where that's the standard. Like if you and I were fitness freaks, which we're definitely in shape, but I wouldn't say we're going to win Mr. Olympia. Right. If we hung out with Mr. Olympia, in a couple of years, we'd probably be a lot more jacked than we are now, but just that's because we're hanging out with people who are lifting weights 3 times a day. So
Yeah.
I say this to people and they think I'm crazy. And I'm like, no, like you're just always going to be able to. And that's why when you hang out in a negative environment, you start to like question some of your beliefs, and you're like, someone shits on you, like, oh, you're like, oh, really? Am I doing that? And then that's why you gotta purge people like that, because they're just not going to add any value to your life.
Got to throw out all the old story junk and get the new, and you can't get the new unless you're putting yourself in a new environment. With somebody talking about those types of things.
Totally, man. So as we wrap the show up here, I want to cover one more thing that you guys, are really good at since you've been growing your business. What has been your favorite marketing channel over the last, I would say, year? Because I was going to say year to date, but we're 3 months into the year. So what have you seen to work best from marketing, at least in your business? And then I'll share that. I'll share mine too. And then we can have the listeners kind of have probably 2 different channels.
It's an ever-changing thing, as you know. And so I'll tell you from last year's experience, like just from a numbers KPIs perspective, the amount of dollars we spent versus the amount that we made, direct mail was the best. That was last year's numbers. Now, because we're not spending $100,000 a year on direct mail, it was a smaller amount than that. Now we're spending more because it's like, why not? We have to double down. This year, it's definitely online. Anything that we're driving traffic to our website, whether that be Facebook or Google Ads, that's performing the best right now, I would say.
Cool. Yeah, the direct mail, I absolutely will agree. At least in 2021, it was just a consistent, like the lead quality isn't the best, but the deals that you get from mail, especially on the follow-up, just make the ROI off the charts. Like you're getting we were getting like an 8 times return. We weren't spending, $100,000 a year. I think we probably spent like 60 or 70 or something like that. But just the overall ROI was phenomenal.
Ours was 6.5.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. And are you sending postcards or letters?
Postcards.
Yeah, same here. I think letters I just don't think I found like if someone's selling, I've said this, I've tested this. If someone's selling a property, like they're going to call a postcard. Like people are like, oh, it's like, dude, if you're not motivated to sell and you get a letter in the mail, you might call in, but you're going to just waste your team's time. I've found with postcards, they see it. There's 100% open rate if you think about it. And, if they want to sell or hear an offer, they're going to call in and we're going to have them in our system. But with letters, you're going to have like this added layer of resistance and they might just get the letter and throw it out. And I don't know. I've just found it more expensive. And from an ROI standpoint, I've just found postcards to be more efficient with marketing.
Yeah, it's a numbers game. I mean,
it's a numbers game. It is a numbers game at the end of the day. And that's like where people, like I found with direct mail, they new investors that I speak to, they don't get it. And like, it just takes time. But like, if you send out 15,000 postcards and you spend, I don't know, $6,000 or doing that or $5,000 or whatever it costs, you're tipping the odds in your favor, because the odds of someone selling at a discount with that many, units mailed, you're like 70, 80% chance you're probably going to make your money back over 6 months. But when people like get this list of 600 people and they think they have the best list ever and they get 3 phone calls and they're pissed off, I'm like, dude, you sent 600 letters or postcards. Like the response rate is 0.5%. Like just the math doesn't work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And dude, you can hyper focus all you want and that's good. But at a scale, it seems like I'm comfortable with sending out 30 or 40,000 postcards. As uncomfortable as that bill is, I just know that I'm going to get at least a deal to cover the expense. Worst case scenario, most likely get 2 or 3 to make my 5 to 6 times return. And for every dollar I put into the ATM, wouldn't you spend that money too to get that money back?
It's scary. Yeah, it's scary for new people. Once they see the results of that, they'll start doing it, and then they'll be able to kind of craft the message and the list and all that stuff. But
don't go doing that. Don't go do that if you don't have a process and don't have this figured out, because that's the biggest mistake, is do it on a smaller scale until you can get a deal under your belt to see how the whole process works, because too many leads managed ineffectively can be a bad thing too.
Oh, totally. Oh, 100%. You can go right out of the business doing that, because you get overwhelmed and you don't return the phone calls. And then the next thing you know, they're calling your competitor. And that was a winnable deal that you could have gotten. And on the online side, we're doing a lot of SEO. That's where we're getting a lot of our leads from, just organic, where, we're ranking. And those have been interesting sellers because the deals are great. I've found with at least the Google leads, the Facebook's a little bit different. Facebook has been hit or miss for us, but with the internet leads, the intent is definitely there. The deal size can be there. The only thing about online leads that I don't like, and I would say I like 85% of the avatar of the online seller. The one thing I don't like is that generally they're always shopping the offer, which isn't a problem if you really have your sales skills dialed in and if you have a good relationship with the seller. But I've noticed that sometimes you're just going to have that seller who's going to get 5 offers and they might go with the highest price. Sometimes we can be that buyer. But besides that, one drawback, online leads absolutely are the best sellers you're going to find. They know everything about your business. They know what to expect. Generally, they're going to be receptive to a discounted price. And they can be some of the best deals ever.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. And it just feels better when somebody's calling you to sell and they already know what you do versus like you having to knock on their door first. But I mean, it's a progression.
Totally, dude. Totally. So I know that you have been, recently focused on putting out some great information on how to start this business, how to grow this business. So talk to the audience a little bit about the course you created and what people could expect, if they were to look into that course. Because you're a great guy, you're a sharp guy, and you know your stuff. So definitely a great guy to teach the business.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you asking. So really what I put together, guys, is it's a A to Z on how to start a business in real estate and how to find off-market real estate transactions. I'm not teaching you how to go make offers on the MLS. I'm teaching you all the departments that it takes and then what the vision is for this business. And then a cherry on top is how to do it virtually too, because I'm not in the market that I do business in. So it's all of that and then a lot more, of course. That's just a real quick down and dirty of it.
Awesome. And then what is the best way for people to check that out if they wanted to look into it?
Yeah, so connect with me on Instagram. It's Michael Buys Houses. And then in my link tree it's called The Virtual Millionaire. And
I love that.
That's the course.
Michael Buys Houses. That's a great Instagram handle. We'll make sure that Anna hears this and she puts it in the show notes. So we'll put that in there. Michael Buys Houses. And Michael, here's one more, I guess, way to people to contact you. If people wanted to just connect with you in terms of like selling you a property or whatever, if they're local to Omaha or they're doing deals there, what's the best way for them to check out your company if they want to do some JV deals with you?
Yeah, hit us up. It's rockethomebuyers.com. Submit the request there and you can, fill out a form and my team or myself will contact you and reach out and we can figure out how can we do more deals together because the landscape's changing, guys. We got to get creative. And I don't know if you heard, Greg, this is a whole nother rabbit hole is Nebraska actually passed a rule to make it illegal to wholesale without a license.
I've heard that. I have heard that.
So we are doing a lot of things to be able to still do business effectively. So if you're afraid of that and you want to figure out how you can, if your state does do that, because it's just a trickle down effect, it's just a matter of time. Then reach out to me, DM me on Instagram, or, reach out to my company. We can definitely do joint venture. We have a disposition in-house, so I'd be happy to help.
That's awesome. We'll make sure we have rockethomebuyers.com in the show notes as well as at Michael Buys Houses on Instagram. Michael, bro, I appreciate your time. This was a lot of fun. And I'm sure the listeners are going to be interested in checking you out.
Awesome, man. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Take care.
Later, man.